In 2023, Delta Airlines, United, JetBlue, and FedEx did something almost unheard of. They sued a European government in its own courts, on its own soil, and they were not alone. Leading that coalition was the very airline that country owns a stake in, its own flag carrier, the oldest airline in the world, 106 years in continuous operation, dragging its own government in front of a judge for the right to keep flying at full size. That airline is KLM Royal Dutch Airlines. So here's the question this video answers. How does the world's oldest airline end up fighting the country whose crown sits in its logo? By the end, you will know the one number this entire war comes down to: 478,000. And you will know why that number decides whether your next cheap connection to Europe even exists. Start with why this matters to anyone flying out of Atlanta, Detroit, or New York. When you buy a Delta ticket to Europe, Africa, or India, there is a real chance the plane you board is not Delta at all. Delta, Air France, KLM, and Virgin Atlantic run the largest transatlantic joint venture in the world, more than 375 combined destinations. Over 900 weekly flights across the Atlantic in peak season. 3 European hubs feed that machine: London, Paris, and Amsterdam. KLM alone serves roughly a dozen American gateways, from Los Angeles to Tampa, and funnels those passengers through a single airport, Schiphol, onward to around 145 destinations worldwide. The Netherlands has fewer people than Florida. Its flag carrier connects more of the planet than most airlines triple its size. That is not normal. That is a machine built over a century. And right now, that machine is being throttled by its own builder. To understand how strange this fight is, you need to know what this airline survived to get here. The company was founded on the 7th of October 1919 by 8 Dutch businessmen, less than a year after the First World War ended. Queen Wilhelmina granted it the royal predicate before a single aircraft had flown. That is the K in KLM. Koninklijke, translated in English, royal. A 29-year-old former army pilot named Albert Plesman took charge and stayed in charge for 34 years. The first flight left London for Amsterdam on the 17th of May, 1920. A leased biplane, 2 passengers, a stack of newspapers. 4 years later, KLM pointed a single-engined Fokker at the other side of the planet and flew it to Batavia, today's Jakarta. 55 days. Within a few years, 8. Roughly 14,000 kilometers, the longest scheduled route on Earth until the Second World War shut it down. The war nearly killed the company. Aircraft seized, scattered, destroyed. A fragment kept flying in the Dutch Caribbean. And in May 1946, less than a year after liberation, KLM became the first continental European airline to open scheduled service to New York. America has been the lifeline ever since. The century since has tested this airline in ways no other carrier has matched. The darkest day came on the 27th of March, 1977, at Tenerife, when a KLM Boeing 747 began its takeoff roll in dense fog without final clearance and collided with a Pan Am Boeing 747 on the same runway. 583 people died. It remains the deadliest accident in commercial aviation history, and it forced the global overhaul of cockpit communication that became crew resource management. Every flight you take today is safer because of what was learned from it. 12 years later, over American soil, came the opposite kind of story. The 15th of December, 1989, KLM Flight 867, a nearly new Boeing 74, descending toward Anchorage in Alaska with 245 people on board. The crew saw what looked like an ordinary cloud. It was the ash plume of Mount Redoubt, a volcano that had erupted 10 hours earlier, roughly 150 miles away. They climbed to escape it. Within seconds, all 4 engines flamed out. Volcanic ash was melting onto the turbine blades and refreezing as glass. A brand new jumbo jet falling silently more than 14,000 feet over the mountains of Alaska. The crew restarted all 4 engines and landed safely at Anchorage. Everyone survived. That single flight rewrote the world's rules on volcanic ash and led directly to the global advisory centers that monitor eruptions today. An airline does not get luckier than that, or tougher. So KLM survived 2 world wars, the worst accident in history, and a volcano. By the late 1990s, the thing it could not survive was its own size. The Netherlands was simply too small a home market. In its final 2 standalone financial years, KLM lost a combined 572 million euros. That is around $662 million. On the 5th of May, 2004, it merged with its biggest rival, Air France, in an 800 million euro deal, roughly $926 million. That created what was then the largest airline group in the world. Both brands kept their own hubs, fleets, and identities. And for years, the quiet truth inside the group was this: the Dutch half was the profitable one. KLM, the junior partner, was subsidizing Paris. Which makes what happened next genuinely strange. Because the force that finally cornered the world's oldest airline was not Air France, it was not Emirates, not low-cost carriers, not fuel prices. It was The Hague. It started with the pandemic rescue. On the 26th of June 2020, the Dutch government announced a 3.4 billion euro, or almost $4 billion package to save KLM. The conditions were brutal. 15% cost cuts, pay reductions for pilots and cabin crew lasting up to 5 years, restrictions on night flights at Schiphol. The state saved its flag carrier and attached a leash. Then, in February 2023, the government went further. Under pressure from residents and environmental groups, it announced it would cut Schiphol's annual flight cap from 500,000 movements toward 440,000. Not because the runways were full, Schiphol has 6 of them, but purely as policy. For an airline whose entire business model is connecting the world through one airport, that is not regulation, that is amputation. KLM assembled a coalition that tells you exactly how global the stakes are. Delta, United, JetBlue, FedEx, EasyJet, Lufthansa, British Airways, Air Canada, and the International Airline Association, IATA. American carriers suing the Dutch state because their own transatlantic networks depend on Amsterdam's connecting banks. On the 5th of April 2023, a Dutch court ruled for the airlines, finding the state had skipped the European Union's required balanced approach procedure. An appeals court reversed that. The Dutch Supreme Court then sided back with the airlines on the procedure. Round 1 went to KLM and its American allies. The government came back anyway. In May 2025, it amended Schiphol's traffic decree to cap movements at 478,000 per year, with night flights cut to 27,000 and effective the 1st of November 2025. Here is what makes that number so dangerous. Schiphol flew 477,552 movements in 2025. The cap was not a ceiling above the airport. It was a lid pressed directly onto it. Zero room to grow. Forever. So, the airlines went back to court. And on the 11th of March 2026, the Council of State, the highest administrative court in the Netherlands, annulled the cap entirely, ruling the government had failed to justify how limiting flight numbers would actually deliver the promised noise reduction. The ruling cannot be appealed. KLM won again. But before anyone in Amsterdam could celebrate, the infrastructure minister announced he is pressing ahead with a brand new decree. Same number, 478,000. Expected to take force November 2026. The world's oldest airline keeps winning battles in a war that refuses to end. And here's the part that should worry KLM far more than any courtroom. While it fights at home, it is losing inside its own group. In 2024, KLM's operating profit fell to 416 million euros. That is around $481 million, down 234 million year on year, even with revenue growing 5.4%. In the first quarter of 2025, KLM's operating margin was minus 6.7%. Air France's was minus 4.2%. For the first time in 2 decades, the Dutch carrier is the weaker half of the marriage. The group's own chief executive has pointed at the Dutch operating environment, including a 41% increase in airport tariffs imposed in 2025. Every year this drags on, the temptation grows in Paris to quietly move long-haul growth to Charles de Gaulle. The threat was never that the French would attack KLM, it is that they will simply stop waiting for it. KLM's answer is a transformation program called Back on Track, launched in October 2024. 450 million euros, that is $520 million in annual savings, targeting an 8% operating margin between 2026 and 2028. Running it is Marjan Rintel, the first woman to lead KLM, whose mandate was renewed February 2026 for another 4 years. And the airline is betting heavily on hardware. The mainline fleet of around 120 aircraft is turning over fast. The first of 50 Airbus A350s ordered together with Air France is expected around August or September of this year, opening on routes like Toronto and Dar es Salaam, and the airline has already started pulling its old Airbus A330s out of service before the new jet even lands. By 2030, the group targets roughly 70% next-generation aircraft, up from around 40% today. Quieter planes are not just a cost play here. In a war that is officially about noise, they are ammunition. And to be fair to KLM, the hand it holds is stronger than the headlines suggest. Its engineering and maintenance arm is one of the largest independent shops on the planet, winning contracts precisely because the global engine crisis has airlines desperate for capacity outside the manufacturers. The Flying Blue loyalty program, run jointly with Air France, posted an operating margin of 23.1% in the first quarter of 2025. Most airlines would trade their entire route network for that number. The Boeing 787-10 fleet anchoring the long-haul operation is among the youngest wide-body fleets anywhere. This is not a dying airline. It is a healthy airline, being squeezed in a vice built from politics. But, as always, honesty cuts both ways. The residents around are not villains. Noise complaints there are real. The airport sits in one of the most densely populated corners of the Netherlands. Fun fact, I, myself, live actually just around the corner of the airport, but because I like anything aviation, I don't make a fuss about it. But some do, a lot. The Dutch courts have repeatedly told the government its process was flawed, not that its goal was wrong. A new decree, written carefully this time, could stick. And no airline, however old, however royal, gets to grow forever in a country that has decided it wants quieter skies. So this is where the world's oldest airline stands, at 106. It beat 2 world wars, the deadliest day in aviation, a volcano, and bankruptcy-level losses. The one opponent it cannot outfly is its own parliament. My view is this: KLM will survive because Delta, the joint venture, and 9 billion euros of group cash give it more protection than any flag carrier its size has ever had. But the Amsterdam superhub, as Americans know it, the airport where a Dutch airline connects Kansas City to Kilimanjaro, has probably already peaked. The growth is going to Paris, Istanbul, and the Gulf. Not because KLM lost, but because home stopped wanting it to win. Here's my question for you. If your own government capped your national airline to cut noise, and foreign carriers like Delta had to sue to stop it, whose side would you be on? The airline or the people living under the flight path? Tell me in the comments, because I genuinely think this one splits the room. And if you made it this far, do me one favor. Hit the like button and subscribe to Explained, because it tells me you want more stories like this one. Thank you for watching this video, and I will see you, hopefully, in the next one.